Hello, this is National Chess Master Rats continuing my video series at chess.com on the correspondence team match played between my video lessons group and the team CARPE DIEM, and this one was played on board 118, high 1700s versus mid 1600 rating advantage. Merllin is our man. What we're going to see in these two games is defeat is caused by a failure to keep your pieces safe. Okay, that's one of the things that we hope that correspondence chess will cure when you sit down to analyze a position. I can't say how fast players are moving. I don't know. A lot of blunders that we've seen have come from just not paying attention to the board. We'll try to isolate these instances in these two games and talk about how such a thing can be prevented. Okay, so we start out normally with just a simple queen pawn opening, and both sides are developing. And here's the interesting break point, which causes white to start to go wrong. Okay, the rules say you have to get a check. We know that. It won't allow you to play any other moves. So white has how many ways to get out of check? He can interpose either knight. So that's 3 moves right there. A bishop is 4. A queen is 5. Move 2 pawns gets him up to 7, and move his king. That's 8. So white has 8 legal moves. So we can pretty much toss out some of these moves. But let's talk about all the other ones. We can toss both those two out, right? Those are just outright blunders, right? Okay. Let's talk about some of the other two and try to help you develop your thought process. Okay. Let's talk about knight fd2. I don't recommend it necessarily. Let's look at what it does and what it doesn't. Well, first off, it opens up a diagonal for the bishop, but it's not really doing anything. It also unprotects this pawn, and that's about all it does. So we can probably throw that move out. Let's consider a queen move. Now, generally you don't want to move your queen right out of the opening, and especially block your own bishop in. Black would probably just retreat his queen, and white has to stop and untangle and find a new square for the queen. Black may just well retreat to b6, keeping some pressure on b2. Okay. Now, knight d2, knight bd2. The drawback with that move is it blocks this bishop in. So it's going to leave pretty much 3 reasonable moves. One is c3. c3 is not that bad. It does take away the best square from the knight. So it also serves to blunt this long diagonal that black would like to occupy. So the most logical move is actually knight c3. White doesn't play this move. Okay, we'll come back to what white does in a moment. Well, why is knight c3 the most logical move? Well, the first reason is it develops a piece. Okay, now white's move bishop d2 develops a piece too, but we'll talk about that when we get there. It does put this knight in a pin, but the question is it a pin that black can do anything about? Well, let's talk about that for a second. Okay, the only way white can attack that, or black can attack that knight again, is to bring his knight out. Now, is that something black really wants to do? White's able to develop another piece, okay? And now this knight is under attack. So black is stuck with probably having to take. But we'll look at the other alternatives in a moment. Now white can simply just take back with his pawn here. Now, it's true white has a weak pawn here, but look what's happened. He's developed a piece. The queen is relatively safe here. White should have a reasonable game even though he has a double pawn. Okay. Now, what else can black do? Well, black could play f5, but one drawback with f5 is it opens up this diagonal. Black's not really playing a true Dutch defense. The other drawback with this, it will limit the scope of this bishop later. Okay, you want to have maximum output for your pieces. In other words, you want to be able to have the most squares they can possibly get to. Yeah, it's true black could fianchetto his bishop, but with white already on the long diagonal, maybe this is not such a good idea. White's going to play a move like castles, and suddenly white's threatening to collect a pawn. And now black has to stop and probably take this knight, and it might be a position where he didn't want to play f5 after all. So as a general rule, it's probably not good for black to put his knight on e4. And one of the reasons that I talk about in a lot of these games is a lot of times we try to construct something too quickly. In other words, trying to force some kind of an issue before the entire army is mobilized. Now, the only time you should really do this is if you actually see a forced win of material, okay, or a lasting initiative that you're pretty convinced that is worth taking the time to do. Because Black is basically only has 2 pieces developed right here. He shouldn't be moving a piece a second time. Black should just follow through with his development, and then White will do the same. Okay. Now, one thing I talk about a lot in the videos is I say every time you move a pawn, you weaken a couple of squares, unless it's a rook pawn you're moving, then you only weaken 1 square. But if you ever push a3, well, you can't in this position. I know that, I'm just making a point. If you push a3, you weaken the b3 square. So every time, it's pretty much the same thing holds true for a piece. Every time you move a piece, you weaken a square. In this case, White weakens the b2 square. Yes, he gains a tempo on the queen, but Black gains it right back. Black parks his queen on b6, and suddenly White has to cover b2. And let's come back to knight c3 for a second. Let's just take this forward a little bit for the fun of it. Okay, I was saying both sides should develop their pieces before they conduct any operations here. Well, White's got 3 minors developed. He's ready to put this bishop into play right now. Okay, we'll just pick bishop g5. Now, should Black want to menace this b2 pawn, it can be covered. Okay, and it can be covered logically. There's moves like queen c1. There's possibility you'd have to analyze it queen d2 with the idea of sacrificing this pawn to misplace the black queen, but you want to be sure that you have adequate compensation when you do that. And that's where analysis comes in, where you sit with the position and you start considering the captures and say, what happens here? What's my best move? And do I have compensation for the pawn? And that kind of goes beyond the scope of what I'm trying to do here, but that's how you get started with analysis. But you see, we don't know if Black wants to menace this pawn. Look at Black's queen side. Okay? Now, so let's go back to the game continuation. And what White does with bishop d2 is forces Black to go attack this pawn. Okay? In other words, how do you say it? Like, try to give it a good example. I had a friend once playing a game, and he reached an ending, and he could send his king one way on the board, and to the king side or the queen side. As it turned out, one of the plans won the game, and the other plan lost the game. And no matter what move my friend selected, his opponent's moves were basically forced. He had no choice what to do. So it's a relatively easy position to analyze. My friend had an advantage with it. It seemed like he was winning with either line, but true reality is moving his king one direction won the game, moving his king the other side of the board lost the game. So in effect, we came to the conclusion that he basically forced his opponent to beat him. Now, how do you want to force your opponent to beat you? Well, no, you don't. Well, let's look at this logic here. Let's try to apply that logic to this position. Do you want to force your opponent to attack you? In here, this bishop is attacking this queen and making White respond to it. So it also makes it a relatively easy move for Black to find, because it's like, we talk about how active moves are good, threats, captures, and checks, because it forces your opponent's reply. But it also in a lot of cases, it makes them easier to analyze it. Particularly if your opponent's in short of time, like if you're playing a real over-the-board game, if he has like a few minutes left and has several moves to make, you don't want to make a move that his reply is forced if you can help it. Unless you're totally confident you'll win the game, you want to try to make a move that is not only good, but causes him to consume more clock time, because he might not find the right continuation. So here, as I'm saying the analogy is that White forces Black to attack the weakness he's just created. Now White has to stop and deal with this. So how do you deal with this? Well, one way is to move the pawn. But then there's a drawback here. You might have to give up and make a temporary pawn sacrifice. So this more or less forces White's reply, bishop c3. So what's transpired here is White's now succeeded. Even though he's developed his bishop, he's also taken away the best square for this knight. Okay, that's what's happened. So now both sides do a little developing, and then black says, "Hey, knights are worth, or bishops are worth more than knights, and this is the kind of position where I'd like to capture that knight, or capture that bishop and win the bishop pair." So white embarks on a dangerous continuation here, and immediately falls prey to the tactics that ensue. Okay, so black calculates this correctly and takes the knight. Now, what white should do is come back and take with the knight or even with the pawn. Now, nobody wants triple pawns, although they're just going to be double pawns. But the alternative was just playing grim after white committed to pawn takes. Now, pawn takes isn't necessarily the correct move, but it's the move white played. And white should have calculated this out because he now embarks on a series of exchanges and ends up holding the short end of the stick. Okay, so he clearly black had this analyzed when he played knight takes c3, and white obliges and collects the queen. So black has one move. He has to take the queen back, right? And now white's kind of got a little bit of a dilemma on his hands. If he doesn't take this knight, it's going to capture on b2. So he basically has two choices. He can take this pawn and threaten this knight, or he can take the knight. Now, neither one is enough. Okay, let's briefly look at pawn takes and consider what black can do. Well, if anything, black can just collect this pawn. Now, black is a piece ahead. White needs to get this pawn back. Let's make a queen, right? Rook takes. And now, let's see what's happened here. Black has 6 pawns, so does white. There's pressure on this rook. Let's put this knight, indirectly the pressure comes from this bishop. Let's move this knight somewhere. Let's put him on d2. Okay? That limits, if white wants, or black wants to make a discovery, it's kind of limited. He can bring the knight to a4. That attacks the rook, and white needs to find a home for it. And probably the best place is actually e1, simply because black may be playing something like knight c3, and that would be attacking 2 pawns. At least we got one covered. But it looks to me like white's going to lose a pawn here and just have a bad game. And maybe black can do better. We haven't analyzed this out yet. So I'm taking time to analyze it just to show you how to analyze a position. These aren't they're forcing moves. They're easy to see. That's what I said. You don't want to make forcing moves if your opponent's short of time, because he'll be able to make the forcing moves. You want to complicate things, but when forcing moves come into play, they're easy to analyze. So what's black's other alternative? Well, black can just develop his knight. And now black is threatening to take on b2. Okay, this pawn, we're not worried about that pawn. We'll take it 10 moves from now, if maybe less, maybe more. But white needs to regain his material. But now this weakness that white created on b2 is back, and now black plays bishop takes b2. So if white had analyzed this far, he would have rejected taking the queen. And how long did I take on showing this? 3 minutes? Don't tell me you don't have 3 minutes to look at a chess game. Okay, if you're a little slower than I, 10 minutes. Don't tell me you don't have 10 minutes. Okay, if you don't have 10 minutes, it's because you're playing too many online games. White could have totally avoided this line. So let's back it up to what white did do. And after knight takes, he took the knight. And now black just does what we've already seen. He collects the pawn on b2. Now black is going to win material. So white tries to save his rook. Black captures it. And now black has some happy choices here. He chooses to retreat the bishop and save it. Now black is the entire rook ahead. So white makes a queen. Black gets it back. And this is so similar to what we've already looked at. But black's the exchange ahead. Black now has a strategically winning game simply because black analyzed it out and saw he could safely take the queen on d1, and white walked into it. So really the rest of the game needs very little comment. Now the weakness on a2 is in the variations is back. There goes the pawn. White doesn't even get any real hope here. Black Black just keeps developing his pieces. White's helping him by trading off. That's not a good idea. Now the black rook is menacing c2. White grabs a pawn, but it's not enough. Black's getting some terrific play. And now the rooks are doubled on the 7th rank. White gives a check, but he can't do anything with this. And something's going to have to give here. And White doesn't do it probably the best job. He now pitches a knight. And Black suddenly an entire rook ahead, and the win is routine. And at this point, after this check, White resigned. So we saw here White just didn't analyze his game, and this is critical to you improving. You don't want to lose a game early, because then you miss a chance. If you blunder a piece and you get a lost game, you miss a chance to learn more about the rest of the middle game, and naturally any kind of end game that would ensue. Here, the end game that White got into was with a hopeless material deficit. You want to try to go into an ending equal in material and learn something. Okay, so let's bring up the other game. And like I say, it's always fun to see what move it will set this at. It's sometimes it starts at move 1, sometimes it picks move at random. Hey, look at that. Now it's move 4. Okay, let's back it up, run through this. And again, Black's problem is he doesn't analyze forcing continuations. I call this the Rossolimo Sicilian. And the game is basically even. I'm not going to talk about the theory. It's all available if you look it up. Both sides are developing their pieces, which is good. And now White plays to restrict this knight a little bit. And, Black should be fine. Both sides are doing what they need to do. And there is, for the two bishops, White does have a couple of targets here. There's a couple of weak pawns. Is it enough? Well, we'll see. Okay, White immediately puts pressure on the pawn on c5. Black covers it. And then here, White sets up a little trick, so to speak. Now, he's not planning necessarily to play queen h5 and give a mate. Let's look at what Black does and see how it goes wrong. Then we'll talk about what he could have done. Okay, so here, White just eliminates the defender, one of the defenders, the pawn on c5, and he takes on d6. Now, Black has a choice of what to do here. Let's look at what he does do. He takes here with the queen. We're going to come back and look at all this after I'm done with the game. I kind of want to run through this because it a little differently this time, then come back and discuss it, because Black just walks right into a material deficit. See, now White picks up a pawn with a tempo on the rook, and suddenly there comes a fork of his queen and his knight, and Black's losing a piece, and once again Black has a strategically lost game by not analyzing. And we'll do the analysis a little bit. Let's just get through the moves here. White's completely winning, and Black has no hope. Collects another pawn and attacks the bishop, and something's going to have to give. If Black saves his bishop, the only safe square, the rook on a8 falls. So who wants to play two pieces down? Well, Black did. Black chose to give up. So let's back it up and see, could Black have done anything any differently here? And this time, the reason I want to do it differently, I talk about how much time did I spend on it. This time I'm going to time it. Okay? So I've seen what Black did wrong. Let's try to look at some alternatives here. Actually, let's go a little forward here first. Let's talk about where he puts the queen. Okay, we're starting it now. The video length is 1916. Okay, so we know Black played queen e5. What are his other alternatives? He's going to be down a clear pawn, but does he have to lose the exchange? Well, if you put the queen on e7, you're going to lose the exchange. The bishop takes c5. So that leaves queen d7 and queen d8. Let's just put her on d7, okay? Well, let's put her on d8. Okay. Now White has a choice of how to take this pawn. Suppose he takes it with the bishop. Okay, that tempos the rook. Now, what can White do? Looks like White can win some material here, and this would work even if, well, no, maybe it'll not work against queen d7. See here, you're attacking the rook. The rook moves. you take the bishop and then you take the rook. So black has to play queen d7 in this position. So it appears. So now bishop takes. Well, you also have a choice of knight takes. We'll come back and look at that. Now the rook can safely go to d8, probably safer than putting him on e8. Knight d6 may come in. But here, black's got a little counterplay. There's a pawn that's being threatened. What can white do to upset the apple cart of anything? Well, he could park his knight or bishop on d6, or he could push pawn to d4. But no matter how you slice it, black's down a pawn. Okay, and so once black played h6, he was going to lose a pawn. And now I've gone. It's 20:51, so I've gone not quite 2 minutes analyzing what to do there. Now again, if you need 10 minutes, you can do it. Okay, so h6 just ran into trouble. Let's try to find another move. How about knight a6? Now, nobody wants to play a move like knight a6 necessarily, but at least that covers c5. Okay, now I don't think there's anything with queen h5. I really don't. But suppose white tries the same way he did. Knight takes, and now queen takes here. Now you get knight e4, and now the queen can safely go to e7, and white's got a reasonable game here. Let's see. He can continue the attack on c5, starting with queen a4. The idea is to put the queen on a5. Okay, that's the idea. So black needs some counterplay. Excuse me. Let's put the rook on d8. Attack this. Attack this. And white's got some prospects, but maybe with a little effort, black can hunker down and defend this. He can make a weakening move like f5 that drives the knight away from this post on e4, and maybe black survives this. Certainly, this is better than what he did. What other alternatives did black have? Well, there's one I didn't cover. Let's see. Wait, am I in the right position? Let's see. No, it's not when the knight went to c7. Okay, let's see. He didn't play queen e7. No, he did play queen e7. And that was after here, h6. And another alternative black has at his disposal is to take this knight with his pawn. Let's take a quick look at that. What should white do? Okay. White can grab this pawn right now. That looks pretty reasonable, doesn't it? White's won a pawn. The knight's protected. If knight a6, white can just retreat his bishop to a3. Or, yeah, that would be safe. Then white's threatening some potential discoveries. Knight takes c8. Actually, on knight a3, I think, no, you can't play knight takes c8, queen takes c5, but bishop a3 will work. So black taking with that pawn isn't any good. So let's try f5. Even though it's a weakening move, it weakens e6. It does have the advantage that it will keep a white knight out of e4. So if white plays knight takes d6 here, after queen takes, the knight comes back to f3. So now I've told, we started at 1914, we're now at 23:58. So I've spent just under 5 minutes analyzing a position and already found a variation where black keeps his pawn, and the outcome is in doubt. So if you need 3 or 4 times as long as I do to see something, fine. Analyze, because you'll start getting you'll get the feel of how to look ahead. Okay. All right. So that pretty much concludes this video. Black didn't have to. You don't have to lose any chess game. You only lose a chess game when you make a mistake and your opponent outplays you. Okay. Every game should theoretically end a draw. You don't win a game unless your other side makes a mistake. So we find the mistake, and then we take our measures to correct him. And I'm sure black's a decent player. He just didn't analyze out, and white did. And these are some of the advantages you can have in correspondence chess if you'll take your time. Okay? So anyway, thanks for your time for looking at this. Here's to improving your chess, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can.